Through the ages, mental illness has been misunderstood. It has been attributed to demonic possession, the evil eye, and even the cycles of the moon. We've gone a long way from this, but still, there are some myths that have persisted. This video is about these myths and the corresponding facts. Myth: mental illness is purely mental. Fact: there is a lot of physical in mental illness. Remember, mental function is carried out in the brain, which is obviously a physical organ. As scientists continue to investigate the brains of people with mental illness, they are learning that mental illness is associated with changes in the brain's structure, chemistry, and function. Let's see depression as an example. There are theories that state that the cause of depression is the depletion of certain substances or chemicals in the brain. However, this cannot be demonstrated in the living brain. There is no diagnostic exam that will make this possible. However, there are changes in the brain of a depressed person that can be demonstrated through imaging techniques such as CT scan, PET scan, and MRI. What are these? Number one, thicker gray matter in parts of the brain involved in self-perception and emotions. Second, shrinkage of the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. And third, a more active amygdala. So can we still say that mental illness is purely mental? In light of this evidence, the answer is no. Myth: mental illness is a weakness or defect in character. Fact: mental illness is a real illness. This is one of the myths that have contributed to the stigma experienced by persons with mental illness. They are blamed for their illness. Like we may hear someone telling a mentally ill person, "You became crazy just because your boyfriend left you." Girl, there are so many other persons who have bigger problems than you. They're homeless, they have not eaten in days, and they don't break down. Look at yourself. You have a roof over your head, you can eat anything at any time, you are in a good school, but what happened? You break down just because of a guy. You deserve to be crazy, weak creature. Remember, mental illness is a real illness. It is as real as diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. Imagine someone talking to a person with cancer. You deserve to have cancer, weak creature. That is so unthinkable, right? But people say these words to persons with mental illness. Myth: persons with mental illness can get better simply by willing themselves to get well. Fact: persons cannot simply snap out or will themselves out of mental illness. We may hear someone telling a person with mental illness, "Fight your disease, be strong. If you cannot do it for yourself, then do it for your family." This may be a tear-jerking scene in a movie, but it does not work that way in real life. Expecting a person with mental illness to be able to do that is just like expecting a person with spinal cord injury to be able to walk simply by willing himself to do so. That cannot happen, that is unrealistic, therefore, that is a myth. Myth: mental illness is rare. Fact: hundreds of millions of people have mental illness. In 2019, there were 970 million cases worldwide. In 2020 alone, there was a 26% increase in anxiety disorders and 28% increase in depressive disorders. Aside from this, researchers from the Harvard Medical School and the University of Queensland made a study covering 2001 to 2022 data. The data came from 29 countries across all regions and economic status. So that means different countries were well represented. And what was their finding? This is the shocker. 1 out of 2 people would develop mental illness in their lifetime. That means that 50% of the 8 billion population of the world either had mental illness in the past, have mental illness at present, or will have mental illness in the future. So maybe it's about time that you ask yourself, in which 50% do you belong? Not only is that mental illness is not rare, but no one is immune to mental illness. Even persons who seem to be so successful and have everything may develop mental illness. For example, Mariah Carey and Demi Lovato both have bipolar disorder. Lady Gaga has post-traumatic stress disorder. Michael Phelps, the most medaled Olympian swimmer who got 28 medals, has ADHD. Eminem has depression. Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain both committed suicide. And irony of irony, Sigmund Freud himself the father of psychoanalysis, had depression, and it was also thought that he had obsessive compulsive disorder, nicotine addiction, and anxiety disorder. Myth: mental illness produces less disability compared to diseases that affect the body. Fact: depression, a mental illness, is the leading cause of disability as measured in terms of years lived with disability or YLDs, and is the fourth leading contributor to the global burden of disease. Let me explain the terms. Burden of disease is the impact of a disease on a given population. So global burden of disease is the impact of a disease on the world population. And burden of disease is measured using disability adjusted life years or DALYs. How do you compute for disability adjusted life years? DALYs equals YLL plus YLD. YLD refers to the years of life lost due to premature death, and YLD refers to the years of life with a disability. Let us see this example. Patient A is a Filipino female born in the year 2000. Life expectancy is the number of years that a person is expected to live. It is affected by several factors, among which are race, gender, and the year of birth. The life expectancy of a Filipino female born in the year 2000 is 71.24 years. So patient A was expected to live for 71.24 years, but she committed suicide at age 20. So how many years of life did she lose due to her suicide? YLL is 71.24, that's the life expectancy, minus 20, the age in which she died, and that is equivalent to 51.24 years. So that means patient A lost 51.24 years of life due to premature death because of suicide. Before patient A died, she lived with severe depression for 2 years. Let's see how many years would be counted under YLD. To compute for YLD, we have to find out first what is the disability weight that could be assigned to the illness that a person had. And this refers to how much an illness affects a person. The highest disability weight for severe depression is 0.83. By the way, 0 disability weight corresponds to full health, and 1 disability weight corresponds to death. So let us compute for the YLD. Years with disability times the disability weight. She lived for 2 years with severe depression, and the disability weight is 0.83, so that will be equivalent to 1.66 years. What is the DALY for severe depression for patient A? DALY equals YLL plus YLD. YLL is 51.24, the number of years that she lost because she committed suicide. And YLD is 1.66, the number of productive years that she lost because of living with severe depression. So the total DALY is 52.90 years. This is the DALY, particularly for patient A. Now that you know the meaning of DALYs, let's look at the global picture. First, the DALYs for depression alone are greater than the DALYs for cancer and diabetes combined. This seems surprising because we look at cancer as a killer disease and we look at diabetes as a disabling disease. But that is the truth. What about the other mental illnesses? The 2019 Global Burden of Disease study showed $125 million for mental illness. Yes, that is a staggering 125 million years lost due to mental illness. But that's not all. In 2022, a study of Arias et al. Showed $419 million for mental illness. Actually, the 2022 study used the same set of data as the 2019 study, just with other classification. For example, in the 2019 study, suicide was classified under injuries. In the 2022 study, it was classified under mental illness. So that accounts for the higher number in the later study. This study also estimated that the economic loss associated with mental illness is about 5 trillion US dollars. Where does this loss come from? It is from the treatment needed for mental illness plus the loss of productivity because of mental illness. Myth: mental illness is not fatal. Fact: mental illness can be fatal. There were 703,000 reported suicides in 2019, but we don't know how many were unreported. We also don't know how many cases of accidents were actually suicides, such as single vehicular accidents containing a single passenger. Suicide is tragedy, and one life lost through suicide is one life too many. But when we factor in age, statistics become even more significant. Suicide is the fifth leading cause of death in the 10 to 15 years age group, and it's the fourth leading cause of death in the 15 to 29 years age group. So that means a lot of young lives were lost through suicide. Myth: mental illness is a disease of adults. Fact: about half of mental disorders begin before the age of 14, and three-fourths of mental disorders begin before age 24. Unfortunately, only about half of diagnosable mental illnesses in children and adolescents receive the treatment that they need. Myth: it is obvious when someone has mental illness. Fact: mental illness is largely invisible. Symptoms can be managed with medications and strategies. And even with new or untreated mental illness, people are usually good in hiding their symptoms. But why do they need to hide their symptoms? It is because of the stigma that is attached to it. Myth: people with mental illness are violent. Fact: most people with mental illness are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to persons living with serious mental illness. And people with mental illness are 10 times more likely to be victims of violent acts than the general population. Therefore, they are usually not the perpetrators, they are the victims. Myth: mental illness is incurable and lifelong. Fact: with the right kind of help, treated appropriately and early, most people recover fully. For others, mental illness may recur throughout their lives and require ongoing treatment. This is the same as many physical illnesses such as diabetes and heart disease. Like these long-term health conditions, mental illness can be managed so that the individual can live life to the fullest. In most cases, treatments for mental illness work and enable the person to live a productive life. Myth: people with mental illness should be isolated from the community. Fact: only a small number of people with mental illness, that's less than 1 in 1,000, need hospital care. In the 1600s, persons with mental illness were confined in asylums. They were usually chained to the walls because they were considered to be dangerous. In the 1800s, asylums became even more popular. But at present, improvements in treatment over the decades means that most people live in their own communities and there is no need for the confinement and isolation that was commonly used in the past. So these are the myths and facts about mental illness. I hope this lecture has helped you understand what mental illness is.